On April 13th, the Iranian forces, for the first time ever, launched a coordinated and significant missile and drone attack on Israel in retaliation for Israel's destruction of one of their embassy compounds in Damascus. That was unprecedented, both in the fact that it happened at all, but also in scale, is one of the largest really in the Middle East that we have seen to date. And according to a lot of the news reports, which we'll be talking about here shortly, 99% of that was knocked down. And many people were saying that this just shows how pathetically weak the Iranians are, how strong the Israeli defense forces are, especially in their Iron Dome, the Arrow system, and some of the other air defense capacities, even some Patriot systems that they have, that basically it was impermeable and nothing happened at all. And it just shows that Israel is going to remain strong. But as a closer look is going to indicate, if you want to do a deeper dive on this subject, we're going to find out it wasn't quite the way that it appeared, and there may be some vulnerabilities that is not commonly understood. To help us uncover some of this stuff, we have an absolute subject matter expert on this, and that is Ted Postol, Professor Ted Postol from MIT. He is a professor of technology and national security studies, I believe, at MIT, but taught there for 25 years, and has really studied a lot of this stuff. And I met Professor Postol a number of years ago, actually here at an event in Washington D.C. And I remember you had spoken at some things, and I was so amazed at how much detail you had on. And at the time, we were talking about the forensics of what happened in an alleged chemical attack in Syria, and you were able to really pinpoint what had happened based on the evidence. And I was so impressed with that. So we wanted to reach out to you to find out, get that same level of analysis and expertise on what happened with this Iranian thing. And you published something recently, Professor, that cast a little bit of a different light on that.
Yeah, well, I should point out that I have, fortunately or not, a little bit of experience on this. It depends on how old your audience is, but some of your audience will remember that during the Gulf War of 1991, President H.W. Bush actually gave a speech in Massachusetts, basically claiming that the intercept rate of the Patriot missile defense in Israel against, at that time, Iraqi Scuds, not Iranian long-range missiles, was really near 96 or 97%. And my colleague George Lewis and I obtained videos of Patriot Scud engagements from the press, and we analyzed them in great detail, and we concluded that it's almost certain that not a single Scud warhead was destroyed by Patriot in the Gulf War of 1991.
Whoa. So not quite 96% then. Wow.
One, as we say, 1 minus 0.96, or the probability was very low. We didn't have all the engagements. We had a bunch of them, though.
Yeah.
And there was no evidence of any destruction of a Scud warhead in any of the videos we had. And reasonably extrapolating, we can't confidently say there was no evidence. Well, there's no evidence of an intercept.
Yeah.
But we can't confidently say there was something that happened by accident that we didn't have on video. But
so was the issue that the missiles were just their guidance systems were antiquated and they just couldn't hit the target?
No, it was quite a complicated and interesting circumstance. The Iraqis had modified standard Scud ballistic missiles. A Scud is a Russian tactical missile design that has a range of about 300 kilometers, and the Iraqis needed 600 kilometers range in order to reach Israel, and actually Saudi Arabia as well, because they did attack Saudi Arabia at that time as well. And so what they did is they lightened the warhead on the Scud. They used a 300 kilogram warhead, 500 or 600 pounds, relative to a 1,000 kilogram warhead, which is around 2,000 or 2,100 pounds. And so they lightened the warhead, and they also extended the fuel tanks by about 20%. So you had a slightly, sort of like a stretch airplane. And because they lightened the warhead, the Scuds would when they came in, you want a really heavy warhead, so it has what's called a good static margin. So the Scud comes in head first, but the warhead was too light, so the Scud would wobble. When it
Oh,
wobbled, the aerodynamic forces on it would cause it to accelerate wildly in a
no
helical
kidding.
pattern. And the interceptor, the Patriots, couldn't come close to matching the lateral accelerations of the incoming missile. And so what happened is they just passed by. And when you looked at the videos in the sky, you would see a luminous, it was at night, you'd see a luminous Scud. They were traveling fast enough to be heated so that they were luminous. And you'd see the rocket motor of the Patriot, so you can tell where the Patriot is.
Yeah.
And then you'd see the explosion of the Patriot warhead behind the Scud. And what was going on was the Patriot came far enough away from the Scud that it did not even sense it was there.
Oh,
And then the
wow.
ground radar of the air defense system said, "Gee whiz, this Patriot has clearly missed the target," because the whole engagements being managed by a ground radar system. And when it sees that when it determines that the Patriot has gone beyond the target, it detonates it, because you don't want an intact
Yeah.
missile
Right.
floating to the ground.
Fascinating.
And and we
Never
also
knew any
actually,
of that.
yeah. So they just didn't hit anything.
Wow.
So
Well, let's move forward here and take a look at what's going on here, because I know you have some observations that I've not seen anywhere in the mainstream media. In fact, here is kind of what you've seen in the mainstream media. Check this out.
האיום האיראני פגש את העליונות האווירית והטכנולוגית של צה"ל בשילוב קואליציה לוחמת חזקה שיחד ירתו את רובם המכריע של האיומים. ירתנו 99% מהאיומים ששוגרו לשטח מדינת ישראל. זהו הישג אסטרטגי משמעותי מאוד. איראן עשתה הלילה מעשה חמור מאוד כאשר היא דוחפת את המזרח התיכון להסלמה. אנחנו עושים ונעשה כל מה שצריך על מנת להגן על אזרחי מדינת ישראל.
So even in that clip there, you can see a lot of really kind of what you're describing there. You see a lot of trails and things going in the air, and you see explosions. And then we're told 99% were actually shot down of drones and missiles and everything else. But you say it maybe wasn't quite that way.
Well, you're showing a video now where two missiles came in. They were not engaged at all. You don't see any evidence of interceptors in the air, and they came in and exploded. There it is again. It's actually the same engagement with a different camera viewing it. No evidence of interceptors. So here again, you're showing warheads coming in, and what you'll see is the warheads, or the missiles. I'm sorry, these are missiles coming in. You see these bright flashes that trail behind the actual missile. That's pieces of the missile breaking off, and it's just left behind. And the net result is the pieces of the missile slow up and fall to the ground. And in fact, what happened in the Gulf War of 1991, and it looks like it happened here as well, is the warheads basically got torn off the front of the missile and fell independently. So there's no accuracy associated with these warheads. Some of the warheads probably fell kilometers short of the target they were intended for. So
So now I've heard some speculate that Because reports are that quite a number of the missiles, the ballistic missiles, either malfunctioned at the liftoff or fell halfway to the target area, whatever. And it sounds like you're describing some of them here literally disintegrating before they actually impact. Is that an estimate or an indication that the Iranian missile force is not very good? Or is this perhaps were they using their oldest stuff just to get them off the table, but they actually have some other stuff, some more modern missiles that are capable?
Well, the two missiles that we saw come in the earliest piece of the video you just showed were very stable and came in and they landed close to each other. And so I don't know, I have no way of knowing what kind of missile they were, but they certainly look different from the other missiles you see coming in.
Yeah.
Very
They
stable.
seem to be faster as well.
And they land very close to each other. So they may be more modern ballistic missiles. But there's certainly, we know from the ground debris, and we have photographs of ground debris, that there were much older ballistic missiles used. A missile called the Kavashgar, but it exists in a bunch of variants, all of which are basically the same missile. So now, what happens with the Kavashgar, which I only know now, I didn't know it before the data I collected on this attack, is what happens is it has a powered flight, and what happens is it reaches its powered flight carries it to an altitude of 50 or 60 kilometers. 60 kilometers altitude and 50, 60. The density of air at that altitude is 1,000 times less than the density of air at sea level.
Yeah.
Now there are fins on the back of this missile, and those fins, if the missile is rotating a bit when the rocket motor finishes propelling, when it shuts down after powered flight ends, it can have a little rotation. And if it were at lower altitudes, the fins would stabilize it. Think of an arrow leaving the quiver of a bow. It has feathers at the end of the arrow, and when the arrow moves forward, the feathers will cause it to stabilize, just because there's aerodynamic forces on the feather causing the arrow to line up with its velocity, with its direction of motion. And if there's no air, if you shot the bow while in a vacuum, the arrow could well tumble end over end. The reason being, there's no air drag and lift on the arrows, on the wings of the arrow's back, or the feathers, to keep the arrow stable. So it's a product of the high altitude of the end of powered flight and a guidance and control system that's, it's like, imagine you were launching a pencil and you're trying to keep the pencil vertical while you launch it. If you have a very, very sophisticated control system, when you launch the pencil, it might be perfectly lined up with its direction of motion. But if it's not quite sophisticated and you launch the pencil, it may have a little rotation. Of course, if you launch the pencil and it's going fast enough and it has stabilizing wings at the back, it'll stabilize. And what happens in the case of those particular ballistic missiles is many of them were not stabilized. They were tumbling at high altitude. And when they come in at high, so now what you want is your missile to come in like, lined up with its velocity. But instead what happens is the missile comes in lined up against its velocity, perpendicular to its direction of motion.
So from what we saw in the video that you showed, both the ones that appear to be disintegrating with the missile body as it's coming in, as well as the two that hit that it didn't appear to be, that one right there.
Those were traveling properly.
Right. But I think in both cases, what you're saying is, at least on the video, we don't see any evidence of either the arrow or the Iron Dome or anything else even engaging them, much less succeeding against them. And what does that tell you?
We don't see any in this particular video you're showing. There's just no interceptors coming up. That you should see balls, small balls. In fact, in one case, you can see a small ball of light that passed one of the warheads. That could be the rocket motor from one of an interceptor. But what you should see is rising little dots of light from the rocket motor of the interceptors coming up in the opposite direction. You don't see that.
And so what does that tell you about the claim that they shot down 99% of all
they didn't shoot at these things even. They didn't even shoot at them. Which incidentally, if you were lying, as I can tell you they were doing, and the public is not, the public does not have the knowledge to look at these videos and understand what they're showing them, you wouldn't want to waste interceptors on missiles because you have no hope of destroying them. The Iron Dome interceptor has no hope of destroying one of these fast-moving ballistic missiles.
Really?
In fact, the Iron Dome has been a near total failure.
Wow. That's a pretty bold statement.
Near total failure against artillery rockets. So the artillery rocket may be traveling at 300 or 400 meters per second, Mach 1, Mach 1.5, something at that speed. These missiles, the longer range missiles that you were trying to hit, would be traveling at Mach 9 or 10 or 11. So the closing speed is so high that the interceptor doesn't even see the incoming missile, so it can't adjust to hit it. It's like you can't see a bullet that's coming in at you so fast that you can't even see it. You can't jump out of the way. If you could see the bullet, let's say a mile away, and you have a fraction of a second to move, you could jump out of the way.
So now I know the majority apparently of the Shahed 136 drones that were sent were shot down by aircraft. Actually, we know, but
yes,
can the Iron Dome knock those down?
The drones were shot down at a very high rate. Whether they achieved 99% or not, there's no way of knowing. But certainly, there's little reason to believe that they couldn't have achieved a very, very high intercept rate. And 99% seems to me high, but there's no way of knowing. It's not totally ridiculous. The other statement is totally ridiculous. There's no
would the Iron Dome take down the Shaheds?
Yeah, an Iron Dome should be able to take down the Shahed. The Shahed is traveling at 120 miles per hour or something. It's like trying to shoot down a kite. It's
right.
Now the problem something like the Shahed poses for Israel is the same problem that it poses for Ukraine. It's got a 100-pound warhead inside it. You can't ignore a 100-pound warhead coming at you if this thing has any guidance, and it does have reasonable guidance. So you have to destroy the drone and the warhead. So in order to do that, you fire an interceptor. So you're firing an interceptor that costs $500,000 against a drone that costs $10,000, $20,000, or $30,000. And this is what the Russians were able to do to the Ukrainian air defense. They would send these Shahed drones in. They called them, I think, geranium. It's the same design.
Yeah, the Garin. I think the Garins and 136s. Yeah, Shahed 136.
Yeah, maybe that's
the Garin. That's the Russian version.
Yeah, and it's a Russian variant of the Iranian design, and you can't ignore it, because if it's coming in at your air defense radar, it's going to destroy your radar, and your whole system is going to be down. So you have to fire at it with an interceptor. If you're talking about Patriots, Patriot Interceptor cost about $4 million each.
Wow.
So,
Well, that's what I was
you
going to
know,
ask you. What about the PAC-3? Will the PAC-3 take down some of these missiles that you were showing?
well, the PAC-3 should be very capable of taking down a drone. It is also very capable of taking down an airplane. It has tremendous agility, and it comes in at very high speed. So my advice to the pilots on either side, I was trying to get that during the Gulf War of 2003. We shot down some of our own planes with Patriot PAC-3s because the system was misidentifying our airplanes, the Patriot system. And I got so concerned, I was trying to find some way to reach someone in the US government to tell them, you have to tell our pilots, get out of the plane if they see a missile coming at them. Because there was no air defense on the part of the Iraqis.
Yeah.
So the best strategy for the United States would have been to not launch any Patriot missiles, because we shot down 2 of our own pilots. Killed their own pilots.
And what about those ballistic missiles that you showed where they were coming in one right after the other? Would the Patriot PAC-3 knock that down?
The Patriot PAC-3 is just not up to the job. It's just it's an excellent surface-to-air missile against airplanes. Very, very capable. But
Now,
the problem,
this reminds me of something that happened in 2019, where the Saudi oil field was attacked either by Iran or by the Houthis, depending on who you want to believe. But it was an Iranian missile. So,
yes.
and these things had really a lot of pinpointed attack. And as you'll see in this clip here, none of them were intercepted. And I want to talk about that in the backside. Gary, roll that tape.
A senior administration official tells ABC News that the highly coordinated attack was launched from Iranian soil. Nearly a dozen cruise missiles and at least 20 drones packed with explosives pounding multiple targets at the facilities. The massive blaze lighting up the skies, the smoke and fire visible from space.
Now, as I recall, Ted, we had PAC-3s that were supposed to be defending that, and apparently none of that stuff got shot down. Do you know anything about what happened there?
Well, I can only guess. But first of all, there were some images in the video clip you showed that showed these tanks that were hit by the drones, by the cruise missiles. I don't know what they were. They were probably cruise missiles.
Yeah.
And they're little red squares around the locations where they were hit.
Yeah.
And if you look carefully, you will see that each of the tanks were hit in exactly the same spot. Exactly the same spot. Now that has to be a homing guidance system. If you look, here it is. That's the part. You see that the holes are exactly at the same spot in the tank. That almost certainly indicates that these drones had pattern recognition homing. In other words, they saw a spherical shape in front of them at the very end of their trajectory. A GPS guidance and inertial guidance brought them to a certain point in front of their target, and then a pattern recognition program allowed them to identify the silhouette of the actual target they were shooting at and give them absolute precision in terms of hitting the target. So these were artificially intelligence guided drones. And the Saudis had to understand what the message the Iranians were sending to them is: we can destroy your entire production facilities at will. So let's try to be reasonable and talk.
And it seems that actually succeeded. It seems like they actually did have, because I know the tensions were lowered after this.
I'm sorry?
Because the tensions did seem to go lower after that.
Yes, things calmed down fast, and that was good for both sides.
It was.
And I think in the case of the Israelis, it really is in Israel's interest as well as Iran's interest to calm things down, because the drones that were shot down, according to statements made by Israeli sources, took about 50% of the interceptors that Israel had available for its defense when the drones were shot down, because all the interceptors were used to shoot down drones. And if one attack of a few hundred drones causes you to use up 50% of the missiles of the interceptors you have, what happens if there are a few thousand drones coming?
Well, yeah, and then actually we had Chaz Freeman on our show shortly after that attack there,
Yes.
and he pointed out that he goes, just imagine you had everything in the world, because by all accounts, and especially now that you're filling us in some gaps here, this is making it more likely that Iran wanted to placate its domestic audience for the loss of its embassy to show that they did something big and commensurate, but they also signal well ahead of time what they were going to do so that Israel and allies could shoot all these things down to keep it from escalating out, because we had to have our Air Force in the air, the French, Jordanians, and of course the Israeli Air Force. All those jets were in there so that they could intercept. 70 of them were knocked down by U.S. aircraft alone.
Yeah.
What is the
Right.
chance of being able to do that if you don't have advance notice, and instead of 300, like you say, it's several thousand, which they have?
Yeah, well, let's remember that if you had 70 shot down by American airplanes, they are probably carrying the AIM 9X Sidewinder for these engagements, because they're relatively short range. Every one of them cost $500,000. So you spent $35 million in air-to-air missiles, and I don't know what our inventory of those missiles are, but I'll bet you we could run out. The manufacturing capacity of the West for the kinds of long wars of attrition,
Yeah, just
that
didn't
we are
exist.
potentially looking at, is very low. And we've done this to ourselves. We have these contractors, the contractors like Raytheon. I don't know why a missile of this kind has to cost $500,000.
Yeah.
It's just it's a lot of profit there.
Yep.
And because they manufacture for profit, that means that they don't have facilities to manufacture. They carefully hone the size of their facility so that they don't have excess production capability that would take away from their profit margin.
Right.
Which means that they don't have any potential to expand their capability if we need it in a long war. And that's what we're seeing in the case of Ukraine. There are no air defense interceptors. There's all this discussion about New York Times is great at this. They just tell you half the truth, which actually means that they're lying to you, because the half truth that they tell you really omits the critical information. So they tell you, well, there's money to buy all these interceptors. It was literally an article in the Times. I was reading it and just shaking my head. But they didn't say that there's no interceptors to buy, because the West has run out of excess interceptors to give the Ukrainians. So, there may be a few interceptors more they can give them, but it's next to nothing. And this is the Ukrainian war now. Is the Ukrainian army is getting close to collapse, because the Russian Air Force can just fly wherever it wants without worrying about being shot down, and drop bombs wherever they want to drop them.
Right. Yeah, we're going to actually talk about that here in just a second.
I'm sorry.
But I want to pivot back, though, to this situation here, because what you're saying here has some significant ramifications, not just for the Middle East, but for warfare in general, too.
Absolutely.
And actually, I want to let you see this a new piece out on CNN that had some amazing access, that went to Tehran and to look at some of their missile force. Now, most people will say, well, if Iran said something, it's obviously not true. This is just propaganda. But let's check out and see what their general says.
Brigadier General Ali Belali was himself once a missile commander in the Revolutionary Guard. He says Iranian missiles managed to hit 2 targets in Israel, including an air base, in retaliation for the bombing of Iran's embassy compound in Syria. While the U.S. and Israel claim to have shot down nearly all of Iran's missiles and drones, the general says Tehran showed the power of its aerospace forces. Today, our drones and missiles have become an important factor of strength and the execution of power in the world, he says. He also showed us this cruise missile, a type also used in the strikes, and arguably currently the most infamous drone in the world, the Shahed 136. The general tells me the Shaheds attack in swarms, often fired off secretly from unmarked trucks, like this one. Everything is pre-programmed, he says. The flight route is chosen according to the enemy's capabilities and blind spots of radars and all the elements that can help us reach the target.
So that seems to match what you just said there when you were looking at the Saudi stuff, especially that they have technology where it's pre-programmed, so it's not dependent, which I think that means, and correct me if I'm wrong, but that it's not subject to electronic warfare kind of means that can knock the thing out from GPS signals, for example.
Yeah, well, it's hard to know because it depends on where the GPS signal is needed by the missile. You think a GPS would be used before the missile arrives at the location of the target. If the missile has a visual acquisition capability, which is a reasonable thing to expect, given what we now know about, given what we saw in the attack on the Saudi Arabian oil facilities, then it would start homing. So it has to get pretty close. And in many circumstances, if the drone has a radio link so that somebody can be managing the final homing, a very strong local jammer could potentially stop the drone from making the final approach. And the Russians have been using that technique very effectively against the Ukrainian drones. So it's been very unbalanced, although the Ukrainians have had a lot of drones as well.
Yeah,
they don't have the effect of jamming. But in the case of the Saudi attacks, my guess is it was some kind of pattern recognition that allowed them to hit the exact right spots.
yeah.
Now, what I took a look at that a long time ago, so my memory may not be it's not as good as it used to be, but I think I concluded when I looked at the attack that the Iranian drones or cruise missiles had come in from a direction, I think the direction was west, but I could be wrong, but it came in from a direction where there was a lot of housing. They flew over a lot of housing. Now, the reason flying over the housing is very important is the radar is trying to look close to the ground. And if they're houses, you get reflections of the radar signal off the fronts of the houses. Tremendous, what's called backscatter or clutter. And the radar reflection from the drone is very small. So you're trying to see a radar reflection that's very small against the blinding clutter.
Oh, I see.
Background. And so it's like looking into the sun and trying to see something that's coming at you on a bright sunny day directly from the sun. So
Interesting.
I thought that the approach that they took to the field was properly set up to blind, because the Patriot radars could just not see close enough to the horizon.
So all of this seems to imply to me that while it's a great PR victory for the Israeli side, and you saw Hagari there, basically saying that we knocked everything down, just a little bit came through. But the issue is if they're not prepared, if they don't get advance warning and they get swarmed, that they could run out of interceptor missiles pretty quick. And if your reports of using half their interceptors is true, then a bigger one, I mean, they could run it, and then the Iranian side could really hit anything it wanted to at that point if they lose that, right?
I think exhaustion, as we sometimes call it, when you exhaust the defense, which we've seen in Ukraine now. If you exhaust the defense, then there is no defense. As long as you're willing to sacrifice
Large numbers.
drones,
Yeah.
and they have to shoot at the drones. See, that's why having a significant warhead on the drone, even if it's not 1,000 pounds, but 100 pounds is enough to destroy a radar or do significant damage to a communication facility. So, and since they're accurate, you can't let them pass. So you have to shoot at them, and you have to use an interceptor. So,
so then let me ask you, because here's some of the ramifications of that. So there's many in the United States as a result of this, and some have been saying this for quite a long time, that, you know what, we just ought to go after Iran. And here's a couple of in particular who've been saying that.
I think the real problem here is that the administration simply will not face up to the reality that we're seeing a war being conducted by Iran through terrorist proxies. That's why I think that what's needed here is an attack on Iran.
And we also had Jack Keane saying the same thing, only a little bit more forcefully.
An attack on Iranian soil? Should that be part of the plan?
It should be. Of course it should be. Absolutely. We're not talking about a go-to-war attack on Iran that we've seen before when we lit up Baghdad. Nobody's advocating anything like that. When the administration says, well, we don't want to escalate, we don't want to widen the war, and no one wants a war with Iran, well, of course, no one's proposing a war with Iran, but holding Iran accountable in terms of some of the IRGC assets, the leadership and their physical assets themselves in a limited, measured way makes sense, and letting them know that we won't stop there.
So let me ask you, in a limited and measured way, as Keane said there, is that even feasible?
They may show you that it's not worth your while. If you want to kick a rattlesnake, you want to bet that it's not going to strike back. I mean, they don't have to do much to make it hard on you. I mean, they have thousands of drones now. They have the ability, as you showed, of these trucks with the Shahed drones lined up like slices of bread, and it's not hard to build these drones. They sold 6,000 of them, I think, to I thought it was Russia. I may not have that right, but they can manufacture these things easily by the many thousands. And so, what if
Brigadier General Ali Belali was his.
What if they decide in response that they're going to pick an American air base somewhere?
And we've got a bunch of them in Iraq and Syria.
Yeah, right. And you have them all over the place. So I don't know what either of these guys are talking about. There is a delusional character to much of the language that these people, all of whom seem to think that the only way to settle things is through some form of violence. And, we're now facing a world that can strike back. The idea that Iran is defenseless is just delusional.
Yeah.
Now,
and could be.
You don't have to like them. You don't have to agree with their government. You don't have to think they're good guys. But, you don't have to like a rattlesnake, but you have to respect it.
Yeah.
And these guys show no respect. I mean, that's why we're in all these wars. We're in all kinds of wars.
Yeah, and if anybody in the government ever listens to this kind of nonsense and actually takes action on it, then the rattlesnake is going to do what a rattlesnake does. It's going to strike back and hit something that you don't want them to hit. And once that genie's out of that bottle, it could be bad for everybody.
Absolutely. I mean, think of all the wars we have had just in the last few years, none of which we have really won. I don't remember winning a war.
No, we haven't won any of them. We've arguably lost them.
Right. And how many times are you going to go out and kick the rattlesnake and see what happens? See if he doesn't give you a hard time. He doesn't have to strike back at you with this polished, pave way bombs and all this other stuff we're shining up. All he has to do is make life unacceptable for you. And it's not hard to do if you're spread all over the place.
Exactly. Yeah. And when especially when you find out the Achilles heel is the interceptor missiles, the exorbitant expense of them, and the fact that the industrial capacity can't crank them out at scale where they can crank out at scale the cheap, attack drones, then you see that this will not play out well if we go down this foolish path.
Well, I mean, you can argue that diplomacy is hard to do, and I would be the first one to agree with you. But provoking wars with people every time you have a problem of some kind with them is insanity.
It's
truly
foolish,
is.
it's insane, it's counterproductive, really, all the way around.
If we provoke a war with China over Taiwan, we'll be short of a few aircraft carriers.
Yeah.
At a minimum. Thousands of American lives, dozens or more of ships, actually, maybe more than that. And we'll lose on top of it. And so will Taiwan.
Yeah.
Because look at what's happened to Ukraine. Ukraine is a shell of what it was. A shell. The Russians have systematically destroyed the entire industrial base of Ukraine. This is not just their army, their entire industrial base. And what they're doing is, war is immoral, so I don't, what they're doing is exactly what we did during World War II. We destroyed the industrial base of our adversary. And it was both Japan and Germany at the time, The industrial base is what the adversary uses to fight you with. So you go after it. And
in fact, I want to pivot that in the last few minutes we have here. I want to pivot to the Russia-Ukraine war here. I want to specifically look at, based on what you've just said, and the balance of power and the industrial capacity that's growing on the one side and being dismantled on the other, is what impact that may have. Here is, we'll just say, an interesting observation of what the leader of Ukraine thinks is going to happen. Check this out.
Our teams, Ukraine and the United States, are currently working on a bilateral security agreement, and we are already working on a specific text. We are discussing the specific foundations of our security and cooperation. We are also working on fixing specific levels of support for this year and for the next 10 years, including armed support, financial, political, and joint arms production. The agreement should be truly exemplary and reflect the strength of American leadership.
So he's talking about a 10-year plan, and I've had a number of guests on here who've suggested there's maybe a 50-50 shot the Ukraine army per se doesn't last the end of the summer. What do you say to that?
Well, war is a tremendously unpredictable situation, but I won't be surprised if we see the Russian army at the gates of Kyiv by July. It wouldn't surprise me, because I think it's not predictable, because it's not clear when the Ukrainian army is just going to collapse catastrophically, but it's looking like it's close to the point of collapse.
And what factors lead you to that conclusion?
Well, you have full regiments, full brigades disobeying orders to go into combat from the main forces. We had the 3rd Assault Brigade, which was the Azov Brigade.
Yeah.
Your local friendly neo-Nazis, and they showed up at Avdiivka when Avdiivka in February was a rout. I mean, the 47th Brigade, I think, they just dropped their weapons and ran, and which I don't want to suggest they weren't extraordinarily brave. I mean, they fought like crazy. There was no question. But they were overwhelmed, and this guy Syrskyi, the general that Zelensky replaced, who would follow his orders, sent the third brigade in, and they got mauled within an hour of engaging the Russians. They lost the battalion, 500 or 600 soldiers, and they withdrew and they were ordered to reattack, and they said no. They refused. And now we have other situations where, the 25th Brigade refused orders. So when you have, and these are, sort of their elite fighting brigades, and it's very well known among the soldiers that they're not being given orders aimed at protecting their lives. In combat, you get in a difficult situation, you step back, you move back to a defended position where you can regroup and stop the assault of the enemy, and then you might you might counterattack. Excuse me, but they're not. The leadership of the Ukraine is not allowing the soldiers to do that. They're saying, hold your ground. So the casualties, because of Ukrainian leadership, are even higher than they would already be. And the casualties are going to be very high. So the soldiers know this. These guys are not stupid. They're brave, heroic people fighting for their country. But if the leadership of your country doesn't value your life, why should you throw it away?
Yeah, at some point, it's like it's a futile operation. The last question I want to ask you is one of our audience members here has asked. And I don't know if you know anything about this or not, but this 80 Soviet era fighters that we apparently just acquired to help Ukraine out. Do you know anything about it? Is that useful? Is it just superfluous?
Well, they could be helpful because the Air Force is depleted in Ukraine. But the problem is that the Russian air defenses are extraordinarily capable, and also since the air defenses of Ukraine essentially don't exist, a lot of these aircraft could readily be destroyed on the ground, which is what I would expect to happen. And because the Russian Air Force will just come in and do very heavy damage by attacking the airfields directly.
So what about the F-16s, which are allegedly coming in July?
A few F-16s. I mean, it's a joke. I mean, it's what are they talking about? 20 or 15 F-16s? I mean,
8 initially.
What is this, a magic bullet? I mean, there are all these magic bullets that people are, if there was a magic bullet, we've seen all these magic bullets, ATACMs, HIMARS, all these things,
all the stuff
that if you look at them from a military perspective, yes, they're capable weapons. You have to worry about them, but they're not game changers. The game changer is having 10-to-1 artillery strike capability. That's a game changer. Having your aircraft drop 6,000-pound bombs without having to worry about air defense interceptors going after them. That's a game changer.
That's a game changer. Yeah.
All this fancy preoccupation with high technology. I'm a high technologist. Show me a piece of technology that's advanced. I'm just oogling over it. But if you ask me as an advisor, I was an advisor to the Chief of Naval Operations. If you ask me as an advisor, should I depend on this, as a game changer? I'll say, wait a second, quantity, as the Russians like to say, quantity has a quality of its own. And you can't ignore the reality of firepower. And the firepower is all with the Russians now.
Yeah, that's what it is. And that's the way it looks like. And we're going to keep following this. Thank you so much, Professor, for coming on today and really giving us some insight here that, well, truly, we don't see this on the mainstream media. I don't see this much anywhere. And it's so crucial to understanding the dynamics of the region and what we can and can't do. And so it's been very, very enlightening. Thank you for coming on today.
Well, it's been a pleasure talking with you. It's nice to talk to an individual and an audience and your producer, all of whom are interested in having a real conversation.
Indeed, they are. That's why we're so grateful to have the folks watching that are watching right now. And truly, folks, we do thank you for watching. Again, boy, I do this sometimes, but I'm sure going to do it this time. Share this with everybody that you know, because people just don't get this information. All they see is this 99% takedown rate like, Iran's terrible and Israel is foolproof and can knock down anything. That's just not the truth. People need to know what the truth is, because if things change in the future, you won't be surprised. And so we want to make sure other people get educated as well. Thank you so much. Be sure to like and subscribe, and we will see you on the next episode of Daniel Davis Deep Dive.